Good morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on what side of the pond you're on. And welcome back to the 168th ranked podcast on the UK soccer charts. That's right, we're up another 14 spots this week. And we have Jonny Hibberd back to talk about the Belarus League. I really think some of these Belarus shows have helped us climb up the charts here, and I'm excited to do another one. Although I think you might not be quite as excited to talk about the results. Welcome back to the show.
Привет, друзья. Hello, everyone. Let's kind of catch up first of all on the action last week. It was a good weekend for the league, if not for me. So we had no 0-0s. We had lots of goals. Again, very unpredictable. But I think the theme kind of that came out this week is, whereas we would say possession is 9/10 of the law, it definitely wasn't in this week's Belarus League. And I think the two games that show that best are the Shakhtar Isloch game, which I suppose we will have to talk about a little bit, and the amazing, to be honest, the Dynamo Minsk-Slutsk game. So the stats in that, I believe Dynamo Minsk had about 66% of the possession and lost 2-1. Slutsk basically had two chances. So one of those chances was just kind of, it was a clearance that came out to a guy called Salu, I believe is the first game for Slutsk he's even started. And he whacked in a low shot from about a good 25 yards that sort of swerved into the bottom right. And they had one other chance, which they scored. So, whatever you say about Slutsk, they are riding a crest of a wave. And it's quite a story.
Yeah, I mean, there's three things that really stick out to me about this match. One, first and foremost, would be that Dynamo Minsk was at home. They still came up on the short end. The second thing is we talked about how Slutsk, they tend to maybe play some games that look more like a hockey score than a football or soccer score. But they won this one 2-1, so they are able to, at least play a little bit of defense. And looking here, Dynamo Minsk, they've scored 10 goals on the year, which is one of the higher totals of the league. So, I mean, it's certainly a capable offense. And, it really, it's probably their most impressive win of the season. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that I had written down, you're going to be proud of me because I wrote down a game that I wanted to ask you about, and that was the Torpedo Minsk 5-2 affair where Torpedo put up 5 goals. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Torpedo are quite a good side, to be honest. They're right up there. And I think this week we had a lot of standout performances from teams and from players. But the standout player for them was, I think, it's Gorbacic, who scored the hat-trick. They just looked very, very powerful going forward. And FC Minsk, it's another team that they started the season looking quite good, and now they're kind of really, really off the boil.
The thing, by the way, I was just going to say real quick that the thing that really caught me is Torpedo. They have been a really good defensive team. They've only allowed four goals all season through 7 matches. Their offense had not been quite so good, though, because coming into the first 6 matches, they had 4 goals, and then they went in and scored 5 goals. So they scored more goals in this one game than they had scored all year coming in.
Yeah, you just don't see it coming, do you? What I will say is Gorbacic's goal celebration was quite poor compared to Salus for Slutsk. I don't know if you saw the kangaroo hop that the whole team did after the first goal, which is obviously a tribute to the Aussie fans. Yeah, I mean, they're first and second, and they were, some of the standout performers. But obviously, the other one to mention, I mean, Slavia got back into winning ways. That was a bit of a smash and grab because I think really Vitebsk threw that game away. But Slavia, they did it with a scrappy goal and 2 penalties, which is just, I think, peak Belarus league, really. But
was there a high number of penalties again this week?
Well, in certain games, it was a factor, I think. Barte won comfortably, so they look like them. They're third now. They look very much like, they could, if the machine starts running smoothly, they look like they're the team that could rise to the top. But obviously, Shakhtar kept going from the cup game last Wednesday night. And again, it was another game. Isloch had the majority of the possession, quite a lot of chances. But when Shakhtar came forward, they hit the target, I suppose no complaints from me, really. An interesting thing from that game was Momo Yansane tweeting the next day that he couldn't sleep and he was really, really sorry to the fans. And so I almost wonder if the international fans are a kind of extra burden or an extra pressure on the players. But I was thinking, if Stevenage players had been apologising all year for the games he'd lost them and the sleep they hadn't had, it's a different approach, and I respected him for it totally.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think the players, if they're playing for a club that isn't used to getting international attention, that certainly it is something that, for the positive or the negative could, certainly be something that's on their mind. Like you said, how the, kind of Australian support seems to be the wind that's carrying Slutsk, if you will.
We talked about it last week, and they're still going. And I mean, they could carry on for quite a while. And until the Bundesliga restarts, they are the top team currently playing in Europe.
One thing I did want to mention with Isloch, and there's kind of two things. One, we kind of talked about betting a little bit and how tough it would be in this league. Isloch, they almost seem to be the team that kind of might be the team that you can figure a little bit, where it seems like if it's a team that they should beat or a team coming in poor form, they get to win. If it's one of the upper teams or a team coming in strong form, they tend to play to the outcome you'd expect most weeks, I've noticed.
Yeah, you might be right there. And I think another thing is they're kind of this sort of limited system that we've talked about before, the sort of mobile sort of front 3 or 4. Last weekend, one of those players wasn't available, Makas, who's, proven goal scorer. And they put in, I forget his name, but they put another guy in, and he, they're trying to put him in the same system, and you could see how much they rely on the normal kind of understanding between the front 3 and 4 because it just wasn't there this weekend. And the other thing is our friend Sveber, who we were talking about, I mean, he did attempt a good English tackle, but it was late and well off the pace. By the way, I've solved the mystery of what's going on with the home games, because apparently the league is not allowing use of artificial surfaces for the next few months. And I don't know whether it's because they decided they wanted to avoid them in the peak, the warmest, like summer months, possibly. I don't know. So, the former Soviet Union tends to just have stadiums lying around. So there's a stadium in the Minsk area called the Tractor Stadium, which is, to be honest, it looks a bit of a dump. but it's a grass pitch, and so FC Minsk and Isloch are having to decamp there. But yeah, that's crazy. And then apparently they'll move back to the FC Minsk stadium towards the end of the season. So again, as we've said, who makes these decisions? How? I don't know.
I think that's just the world of football. I think, like we talk about how we don't have pro-rel over here a lot. It's just that no matter what country you go to, there's going to be something about football that just makes you shake your head.
Yeah. So, I mean, we often say that about there used to be, I forget, one of the sports companies did an advert where they sent this guy from sort of Brazil to a sort of English non-league match. He was kind of saying, football's different here, So for us, it's muddy boots and Bovril, and, that just isn't football in a lot of the world. So I suppose the last thing, really, the big thing this week is that this is the last weekend for the Belarus League to shine in splendid isolation because of, obviously, the decision that's been announced that the Bundesliga will be back the following weekend. It just, you realize how many people didn't know Belarus was playing because it was very much kind of talked about as the return of football and so on. And I wonder how that's going to impact kind of people watching the Belarus League. I mean, most of the people I know who've got into it are very much planning to stick with it. And we're just wondering, first of all, the Bundesliga will be played with no fans at all, right? Whereas in the Belarus League, we have low attendances, but, there's a huge difference. I mean, I can tell you, an English game, 15 away fans can make a lot more noise than you would think.
Well, one thing I was going to ask you about it, and this was something that I saw you posting online this week, is so I saw that are the games free to attend, and they're encouraging people not to come or something along those lines? I've been meaning to ask you about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's another weird thing because, from a sort of, for want of a better phrase, Western perspective, we think of, the gate money for a game as being a really important thing. I mean, in this current coronavirus situation, League One and League Two teams are talking about how they're not going to survive without the gate money. But there's something very, very different going on in a lot of Eastern Europe. I mean, I remember turning up to a second division game in Ukraine and trying to pay and basically being laughed at because they say, the mate I was with says, come on, nobody pays for the second division. So, and from the first day this season,
I will tell you something random that I saw online the other day, and it made me think of these episodes. It was a map of how much per capita people in each country spend on alcohol. And so Ireland was second, but there was one country that beat out Ireland, and guess what it was?
Oh, was it Russia?
Russia was up there, but no, it wasn't Russia. There's one country that I think they drink like twice as much as Ireland. It was crazy.
You mean it? You don't mean it's Belarus, surely?
It was Belarus. Wow. Vodka and tractors.
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw that. I was like, well, that's something there. But yeah, it was an interesting map. But I guess so. So it was something like the Irish spend more of their money, like a higher percentage of their money on alcohol. But it was something like Belarus drinks like 6 liters of alcohol a month, and Ireland's like 3 liters.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, that was a good, a real good, like 6 months back in my hard drinking days.
Yeah, I mean, there was a thing for a long time in the kind of post-Soviet countries that beer for them wasn't really alcohol. For them, beer was like having a Coke or something. I think it's starting to change a bit now, but
I
Yeah.
believe what I read was that in Russia, at least up until the early 2000s, that anything with less than 10% alcohol was considered a soft drink. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and when you think 10%, I mean, you get some wine that's less than 10%. So basically, you've got, wine or really strong beer.
Yeah, Belgian
Soft
beer
drink.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a few problems with that in the past. So I'm going to kind of cut to the chase.
Sorry, I digressed.
Yeah. So the Bundesliga, it's obviously going to be technically better football. It's going to be more hyped and so on. But, there are all these rules they're going to have about the players can't sort of hug each other during a celebration. They're not supposed to, in the Korean league, they're not supposed to talk to each other. How's that going to work? How are people going to communicate on the pitch? And so there's a real danger that these big leagues are going to be quite a poor spectacle. And I think
So
there's
I'm guessing they've suggested French tackles instead of English tackles.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that there's something very sort of earthy and genuine about the Belarus League, which I hope will carry it through if it carries on.
That actually is the point that I actually was wanting to make when I brought up the free tickets and encouraging people not to come. Is there's been so much made of the greed of the Premier League and trying to preserve their TV deal at all cost, and that's with the Belarus League. It's not about money; it's literally about national pride.
Yeah, I think for the fans that's true, but I think it's probably a subject for another podcast, to be honest. But there is a dark underbelly of certain business interests and why they decide to own a football club, and maybe they're getting tax breaks or something from owning a football club. And it's even happened in English football in years gone by. I mean, ask anybody who's a non-league fan about the Southern English teams owned by sort of dodgy mechanics or garage owners,
I remember reading an article about, I guess at one time in the 90s, Barrow AFC was owned by a guy in Liverpool that was part of the mob, and that was one of the things that I read. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely happened.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember reading in Ukraine a few years ago that there were really only 3 or 4 genuine football clubs, and then all the others were fronts for various businesses and who knows what. So, like I say, really, it's a subject for another podcast. Let's just quickly do our preview of next week. What are we looking forward to? Yeah, so Slutsky Energetic, I think that'll be a good game. You still think that, for Slutsky, the bubble must burst somewhere along the line, but it just hasn't happened yet. Going further down, I would hope that Isloch would beat Belshina quite easily. But on the other hand, when we talked about Belshina and Smolovici, well, we're starting to identify a difference between them. The Smolovici are better technically, and they obviously did really well in the league below, and they're just struggling with the step up. And they're a bit too cultured. They lack a bit of urgency. And Belshina are a bit more gutsy. So they, at some point, Belshina, I think they will spring a surprise, but I hope not this weekend. And I think a big one is the Battle of the Dynamos. So Dynamo Brest against Dynamo Minsk. And at the moment, I don't know which way that will go. If we'd gone back 2-3 weeks, I'd have said it will go to the home side. But I think we can expect another open and action-packed weekend.
Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give one thing for this week, and this is something I've decided to come up with for the gamblers out there, is I'm going to give my 3-game parlay of the week. My 3-game parlay of the week for the Belarus League this week is going to be Sluts, Isloch, and Bate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Bate, that looks nailed on. I think Smolovici will struggle with Barté for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the easiest one. I mean, certainly, I think Energetic and Slutsk is the least, or it should be the most competitive game of those three. I think Slutsk takes it at home. They're just on great form. They're at home. I like them there. And in Isloch, like we talked about, they seem to beat the teams they should beat. I really like Isloch, and then Bate, even though they are the road team, they should beat Smolovici. I think that would be a nice 3-team parlay that you could lay down.
Okay. Sounds good.
Anything else today, Jonathan? We should just mention real quick that in about 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a big show with you about Stevenage, maybe do a 2-parter where we're just going to kind of talk about your history of being a Stevenage fan, the history of the club, and a little bit of the state of the club. And I think it should be a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing those episodes with you.
Absolutely. I've got so much to talk about, and really, because we don't know what decisions are going to be made, we heard today that Macclesfield have been docked 7 points, which means we're only 3 points adrift at the bottom. So how are they going to finish the league now? Or if they don't finish it, it's a can of worms, but I'm really looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, ultimately, I don't think that there's a way they can relegate teams unless they play every game. So I think that's probably your best thing to hold on to right now is that, hopefully they just cancel the season. Over here we have an NFL football team, the New York Jets, and they tend to struggle most years. And there's a joke that Jets stands for just end the season. So maybe that should be Stevenage's war cry right now.
Gosh, if we have been praying to stay up, this wasn't quite the way. This wasn't quite the circumstance we were hoping for. But there it goes.
Well, have a great day, Jonathan, and I'll talk to you again next week. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Спасибо большое. Bye.